My parents sold my daughter's 165 aloes and rare book collection. But they never expected what I did next. The day I found the empty shelves, my daughter didn't cry. She just stood there, staring. Her small fingers touched the bare wood where her favorite leather-bound copy used to sit. The one she used to open every Sunday morning like it was a treasure chest. The one she said smelled like history. Dad, where did they go? That question still echoes in my chest. I wish I could say I had an answer. But the truth is I already knew. And it broke something inside me. It started 3 years ago, after my wife passed away. Cancer is cruel. It doesn't just take a person. It rearranges everyone who survives. My daughter, Emily, was only 9 when she lost her mother. I thought I was the strong one. The protector. The steady wall she could lean on. But grief has a way of exposing cracks. Emily stopped talking much. She stopped playing outside. She stopped smiling the way she used to. Until one day, she found a book in the attic. It was an old first edition of The Secret Garden. My wife had loved rare books. She collected them slowly, carefully, one at a time. She used to say books were pieces of time you could hold in your hands. Emily opened that book, and something changed. She ran her fingers across the yellowed pages like they were fragile wings. She asked questions about the author, about the year it was printed, about who might have owned it before us. For the first time since the funeral, she looked alive. That book became her comfort. Then another one, and another. We began cataloging them together. Every Saturday, we'd sit on the living room floor, writing notes about each edition. My wife had left us 30 rare books. First editions, signed copies, limited prints. Over time, we added more. I worked overtime shifts. I sold my old motorcycle. Not because I cared about the money, but because I cared about that light in my daughter's eyes. By the time Emily turned 12, her collection was known in collector circles. She had a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, a signed copy of The Great Gatsby, a rare illustrated Alice in Wonderland. They weren't just books. They were healing. They were memories of her mother. They were our Saturdays. But my parents never understood that. They believed books were just paper. They believed grief should be gotten over. They believed I was wasting money. You're raising her to live in the past, my father once said. I ignored it. I thought they'd eventually see how important it was. That was my mistake. Last summer, I had to travel out of state for a 3-day work conference. Emily begged to come, but it wasn't possible. My parents offered to stay at our house to watch her. I hesitated. There had always been tension between them and me after my wife died. They thought I was too soft with Emily, too emotional, too focused on memories. But they were her grandparents. I convinced myself it would be fine. When I came home Sunday evening, the house felt wrong. Not messy. Not damaged. Just hollow. Emily ran into my arms, but she didn't smile. Dade. Grandma and Grandpa said we needed space. I didn't understand. Then I walked into the living room, and my heart dropped. The shelves were empty. Every single rare book was gone. At first, I thought we'd been robbed. I called the police immediately. But my mother stopped me. Her voice was calm, almost proud. We sold them. I remember the silence that followed. You what? They were worth money? My father said. Real money. $165,000. Do you know what that could do for her future? For your future. My ears were ringing. You sold them. I repeated, like maybe I'd misheard. They're just books. My mother said. We put the money in a separate account. We were going to surprise you. I looked at Emily. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there, small and quiet, holding the empty space where her favorite book used to be. That silence hurt more than any scream could have. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply asked one question. Did you ask her? They looked confused. She's a child, my father said. She doesn't understand money. No. She understood something much deeper. That night, after my parents left, Emily finally broke. She cried into my shirt until it was soaked, not because of the money. Not even because of the books. They were Mom's, she whispered. And that's when I made a decision. The next morning, I went to the bank. The account my parents had opened was in my father's name, for Emily's benefit. They thought they were smart. But they had underestimated me. You see, my wife had documented every single book in her collection. Photographs, certificates of authenticity, purchase receipts. Legally, those books were part of her estate, and her estate belonged to me and Emily. What my parents did wasn't a favor. It was theft. I contacted a lawyer. When my parents received the official notice, they were furious. How dare you? My father shouted over the phone. After everything we've done for you. You sold her healing, I said quietly. You don't get to call that love. The case moved quickly. The auction house that handled the sale had records. Buyers had records. Some books were already shipped overseas. Some were in private collections, but money leaves trails. Within 4 months, the court ruled in our favor. The account was frozen. My parents were ordered to return the full 165 zalozen, plus damages. But here's the twist they never expected. I didn't use the money to rebuild the exact same collection. Emily surprised me. One evening, she sat beside me and said, "Dad, I don't want them back." I stared at her. "You don't." She shook her head. "They were special because Mom chose them. We can't replace that." Her words carried more wisdom than most adults I know. So we did something different. We used part of the money to start a small rare book scholarship in my wife's name at the local library. A fund to help children access literature and history. We used another portion to carefully rebuild a smaller collection. Not identical copies, new stories, new memories, and the rest. We placed it in a trust legally protected, untouchable by anyone else. As for my parents, the relationship never fully recovered. They apologized eventually, quietly, without excuses. But trust, once broken, never returns in its original form. Emily is 15 now. She still loves books. But she loves writing even more. Sometimes I watch her at her desk, scribbling stories in her notebook. Stories about brave girls who lose everything and find something stronger inside themselves. One night, she handed me a manuscript. On the first page, she wrote, "For Mom. And for Dad. Thank you for protecting my stories." I didn't realize I was crying until she hugged me. Here's what I learned. People will sometimes take from you thinking they know better. They will justify it with logic, with money, with good intentions. But not everything valuable can be measured in dollars. Some things are sacred. Grief is sacred. Memories are sacred. Healing is sacred. And when you protect those things, even when it means standing up to your own family, you teach your children something priceless. You teach them that love is not control. Love is respect. The shelves in our living room are no longer empty. They hold new books now. Different covers. Different stories. But the most valuable thing in that room isn't on the shelf. It's the quiet understanding between a father and his daughter. That no matter who tries to rewrite your story, you always have the power to take the pen back. You know, for a long time after the court case ended, I thought the story was over. Justice served. Money returned. Lesson learned. But life doesn't move in clean chapters like books do. It lingers. It tests you again. A few months after everything settled, my father had a minor heart attack. When I got the call, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just fear. Because no matter what he had done, he was still my father. I drove to the hospital alone. I didn't tell Emily at first. She had exams, and I didn't want to shake her focus. When I walked into his hospital room, he looked smaller than I remembered. Machines beeped softly around him. The man who once seemed so certain about everything now looked uncertain about breathing. He saw me and his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Regret. "I thought I was helping," he said quietly. For the first time, there was no pride in his voice. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. That was the hardest part. They truly believed they were right. They believed money could fix pain. That security mattered more than sentiment. That's how their generation survived. They valued stability over emotion. But survival and healing are not the same thing. He swallowed hard. I didn't understand what those books were to her. No, I said gently, you didn't. There was a long silence between us. Not the angry kind. The reflective kind. You chose her, he whispered. Over us. That sentence could have been an accusation. Instead, it sounded like realization. I chose what was right, I said. For my daughter? He nodded slowly. In that hospital room, I understood something I hadn't before. Standing up to someone doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you love truth more than comfort. When I told Emily about his heart attack, she surprised me again. Can we visit him? She asked. I studied her face carefully. There was no bitterness there. No resentment. Just curiosity. When we entered his room together, my father's eyes filled with tears. Emily walked up to his bedside and handed him something. It was one of her own handwritten stories. I wrote this, she said softly. It's about a king who thought gold was the most important thing, until he almost lost his family. My father couldn't speak. He just held that paper like it was the rarest book in the world. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come through speeches, it comes through simple gestures. After that day, things shifted slowly. Not magically, not perfectly, but slowly. My parents started coming over for dinner again. They never commented on the new books. They never mentioned money. Instead, my mother began asking Emily about her writing. My father started bringing her old history magazines. He found at flea markets. It wasn't the same as before. It was humbler. More careful. One evening about a year later, something unexpected happened. Emily received an email. A well-known publisher had seen one of her short stories online. The same story she had given to her grandfather in the hospital. They wanted to talk. I thought it was a scam at first. But it wasn't. They were serious. At 16 years old, my daughter was being offered a small book deal. The advance wasn't massive. Not even close to 165,000. But when I looked at her face while she read the contract, I realized something beautiful. If my parents had never sold those books, Emily might never have discovered her own voice so deeply. The loss forced her to create instead of just collect. Pain had redirected her. Not destroyed her. The day we signed the publishing contract, she asked me something I'll never forget. Dad, are you glad it happened? That question caught me off guard. Was I glad someone betrayed our trust? Was I glad she cried herself to sleep that night? No. But was I proud of who she became because of it? Absolutely. I'm glad we didn't let it break us, I told her. And that was the truth. Her first book was dedicated to her mother. And the second dedication surprised everyone. To my grandparents. Thank you for teaching me that stories are more valuable than money. When my father read that line at her small book launch event, he broke down in front of everyone. Not out of shame. Out of growth. Life has a strange way of humbling us through our mistakes. Today, the scholarship in my wife's name has helped over 40 children access rare and classic literature. Every year, we attend the ceremony. Every year, I see kids holding books like they're holding possibility. And every time, I think about those empty shelves. They felt like the end of something. But they were actually the beginning. If you're listening to this right now, maybe someone has taken something from you. Maybe they said it was for your own good. Maybe they didn't understand the value of what you were protecting. Here's what I've learned. You can't control what people take. But you can control what you build afterward. You can choose bitterness. Or you can choose growth. You can let loss define you. Or you can let it refine you. My parents sold a rare book collection for $165,000. What they didn't realize was that the most valuable story in our house was never on those shelves. It was sitting at the kitchen table every night, writing her own future, and that story no one can ever steal. A few years have passed since Emily's first book was published. Sometimes I sit in the same living room, where the shelves once stood empty, and I let myself remember that day. The silence, the shock, the feeling that something sacred had been ripped away. If someone had told me then that the worst moment of our lives would one day feel like a turning point, I wouldn't have believed them. But time has a strange way of revealing what pain is really shaping inside us. Emily is 18 now. Her second novel did better than the first. Schools invited her to speak. Local bookstores displayed her work in the front window. I watched strangers line up to get her autograph, and I would quietly step aside, just observing, because I knew something they didn't. They were meeting an author. I was watching the little girl, who once stood in front of empty shelves, and learned that even when everything is taken, your voice remains. One evening, after a long book signing event, Emily and I sat in the car in silence. "Dad," she said softly, staring out the window, "do you ever think about the books we lost?" I smiled a little. "Sometimes. I used to dream about finding them," she admitted. Like they'd just show up at the door one day. There was no sadness in her voice now. Just reflection. "I think they served their purpose," she continued. "They brought me to this." She held up her own book. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than I ever had before. We spend so much of our lives trying to preserve things. Objects. Traditions. Old versions of ourselves. But sometimes those things are stepping stones, not destinations. A month later, something unexpected happened. An elderly man contacted us through the publisher. He had purchased one of the rare books years ago at the auction. A first edition that had belonged to my wife. He had recently discovered the story behind it, after reading an interview Emily gave. He wanted to meet. I wasn't sure what to expect. Anger, regret, awkwardness. Instead, we met a gentle collector who treated books the way Emily once did. With reverence. He brought the book with him. When he placed it on the table in front of us, I felt my breath catch. It was the same worn leather cover. The same slight crease on the spine. Emily didn't reach for it immediately. She just looked at it. Then she surprised me again. "You should keep it," she told the man. He blinked in confusion. "It belongs with someone who loves it," she said kindly. "And I already have what I need." The man insisted. He wanted her to have it back. After a long, emotional conversation, they made an agreement. The book would remain in his collection, but it would be officially donated one day. To the scholarship library in my wife's name. It wouldn't sit hidden in a private vault. It would be read. Shared. Passed down. When we walked out of that meeting, I realized something that almost made me laugh at how ironic life can be. The books my parents sold to secure her future ended up inspiring a legacy far greater than any savings account could provide. That night, Emily and I sat on the porch together. "Do you hate them?" she suddenly asked. She didn't need to say who. I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly. "I don't hate them." "Why not?" "Because if I held on to that, it would poison everything else." She nodded slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just refuses to let it control what happens next." Over time, my parents aged. Slower steps. Softer voices. One Sunday afternoon, my father sat beside Emily as she worked on her third manuscript. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success was about how much money you could gather." He looked at her pages. "I was wrong." Emily smiled gently. "What do you think it is now?" He took a deep breath. "How much meaning you leave behind." That was the moment I knew he had truly changed. Not because of the lawsuit. Not because of the embarrassment. But because he had watched his granddaughter turn loss into purpose. Years later, when my father passed away peacefully in his sleep, we found something unexpected among his belongings. In a small wooden box beside his bed was a stack of printed pages. Emily's hospital story. The one about the king who valued gold more than family. He had kept it all those years. Folded carefully. Protected. Maybe that was his silent apology. Maybe that was his way of saying he finally understood. At his funeral, Emily read a passage from her latest book. It was about mistakes. About how sometimes the people who hurt us are also the ones who shape us. About how broken decisions can still lead to beautiful outcomes. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the service, my mother held my hand tightly. "I wish we had understood sooner," she whispered. "So do I said. "But life doesn't move backward. It only gives us chances to grow forward." Today, the scholarship has expanded beyond our city. Other donors joined after hearing Emily's story. Rare books circulate through libraries, where children who could never afford them now get to hold history in their hands. And every time I see a child gently turn the page of an old book, I think about that empty shelf again. Because that emptiness taught us something powerful. When something material is taken from you, it feels devastating. But when you protect your values, your integrity, and your love, you protect something far more permanent. If I could go back to the moment my parents said, "We sold them," would I stop them? Of course. No child should feel that kind of loss. But would I erase the growth that followed? The strength Emily found? The legacy built from it? I don't think I would. Because here's the truth. Money can be counted. Books can be appraised. Collections can be sold. But resilience multiplies. And the greatest inheritance I could ever give my daughter was not rare editions or a protected trust fund. It was the example of standing up for what matters. Of choosing respect over fear. Of turning betrayal into purpose. The shelves in our home are full again. Not just with books, but with stories written by my daughter. And sometimes, late at night, I'll see her pause at the doorway, look at those shelves, and smile. Not because of what was lost, but because of what was built. My parents sold her rare book collection for $165,000. But in trying to measure her world in money, they accidentally taught her something priceless. That the most powerful stories are not the ones you buy. They're the ones you survive. And in the end, the only thing truly worth passing down is the courage to protect what cannot be replaced.